The primary problem with capitalism for black people is that we're vulnerable. And when you're that vulnerable, it doesn't necessarily matter who will exploit you. Like, if you're a prey, you're prey. I'm Aaron Ross Coleman, and this is A Word: Why Black Billionaires Won't Save Us. I would define capitalism as a system, particularly here in the United States, that has been based on the extraction of value from labor for entrepreneurs. It's a very simple definition that if you look at slavery, you can see the labor value being extracted from slaves. If you look at Jim Crow, you can see that same kind of value being extracted from sharecroppers. And even if you look today, you can see that same kind of value being extracted in the kind of credit markets through predatory lending. So black people's relationship to capitalism has largely been one of extraction through violent means. I think there's 5 black billionaires in the United States. There are 40 million black people here in the United States. The median black household income is around about $40,000. If we're talking about black economics or black economic prosperity or black wealth, it makes a lot more sense to talk about people who are much closer to the mean or the median than to focus on like extreme outliers like a Jay-Z. When you focus on the billionaire class, you end up crafting economic policies to try to compensate or reward the billionaire class. But it's a really inefficient way to stimulate the whole economy. Black businesses are really, really important, and I think that it's important to say that and acknowledge that. They serve a crucial role in neighborhoods. I think the fundamental problem with racial inequality in the United States is to really think about like the size of it, the shape of it, and how big it is. So right now, it's about a 10-to-1 gap between the median wealth for a black family and the median wealth for a white family. So for every dime that a black family has, a white family has $1. And you're not going to close that by buying black. Those are good things to do, and there are really important cultural and political and all kinds of communal aspects and communal benefits that come out of supporting black-owned businesses. But one of them is not closing the racial wealth gap, simply because the money is not there. I think that it's really important that we talk about closing the racial wealth gap or racial inequality in the correct way. I don't want to belittle the importance of black-owned businesses. They need all the support they can get. However, they're not a substitution for reparations or any other kind of macro redistributive policy that would address the actual specific wounds that constitute American racism. There was this idea, somehow because of segregated society, that there was more economic solidarity that created like a better kind of quality of living. So of course we have examples like Black Wall Street from the segregation era that show that black wealth did exist. Outliers have always existed, but when you're measuring the impact of an economic system or the success of an economic system, it's good to look at like what's the average or what's the median. And the median black person during Jim Crow was not doing well. There is a long-going myth about the abilities of the black dollar and what it can and can't accomplish. I think the way that the multi-trillion-dollar annual black spending power gets discussed is really misleading. A lot of that money is really already dedicated to things like rent, to things like bills, to things that you don't really have an option to spend, and to the degree that you have a little bit of lateral movement, discretionary money, that's not enough to defeat 100 years of Jim Crow. It's not enough to compensate for 250 years of slavery. It's really a lot about scale. And if you want to solve the problem at the scale that it exists far beyond the scale of the amount of money black people make every year. It exists at the scale of a multi-generational plunder, and that's how we should talk about it.
And I feel that somewhere this conviction will be found unconstitutional.
If you look at the civil rights era, there were economic policy goals that were unmet. People like Martin Luther King advocated for a universal job guarantee, wanted things like a universal basic income, some of the popular policies that you hear coming back around today. But what these civil rights leaders understood was that you can't just simply integrate society or just let people go and expect them to be equal. There's always a way to resist. As it applies particularly to resisting American capitalism, you see that there's an increased interest in socialism here in the United States, and that there's a very long history of black people participating in socialism. If you look at people like Martin Luther King, he could be described as a democratic socialist. If you look at a lot of your Black History Month faves like W.E. Du Bois, he was a socialist. So I think it's very important to experiment and to push the boundaries on what is possible here in the United States. There's social democracy that offers a less oppressive form of capitalism. You know, there's democratic socialism that, you know, has the opportunity of collective ownership. And throughout all of these different economic systems, it's always important to have a really strong focus on anti-racism. So the project remains to find an economic system that is not fundamentally racist, that is not founded in racism, and that provides restitution and opportunity for black people.